Is it possible to return to a place where there is friendly competition between nations that ultimately um, unites and inspires the peoples of these different worlds, these very different worlds that have, especially recently, come to conflict over the war in Ukraine? The tension builds. The war, the conflict, the suffering is actually creating more and more division, creating more and more hate. I think, as we've talked about, I think science and engineering, and especially the most epic version of engineering, which is rocketry and space travel, unites people. Unites people even in a time of tension, conflict, and war. So, do you have a hope that we can return to that place?
I think historically, spaceflight has been one of the most bonding things. We have countless examples of, Cold War enemies coming together and working together, lending a hand. Apollo 13, for example, of course, there was the potential that who knew where it was going to re-enter, since it was not in the planned trajectory at all for re-entry. And the Soviet Union said, hey, wherever they land, like, we'll help you guys out, basically. And that was a pretty big thing at the time, obviously. We also, in 1975, saw the Apollo-Soyuz mission, which was an Apollo spacecraft docking with the Soyuz spacecraft. First time there's international collaboration. And again, 1975, still very amidst the Cold War. Yet we have this collaboration that I don't know what else could have done that. And think about what it actually takes to do that. You have to come up with a docking module that is, that takes the two different air environments and the two different docking systems, and talk to the engineers and mission planners and figure out, train together. The cosmonauts and the astronauts trained together and got to know each other. They were crossing boundaries and borders and coming together for this mission. And even if it was totally a fluff piece, like even if it was totally this, like, cynical, just trying to make a pretty face for everybody for the cameras or something, obviously it still had an impact.
Yeah, the symbolic impact, but there's also the practical impact. I mean, a lot of people have to work together.
Yes,
and that has a ripple effect on the culture, on the different engineers. Yeah,
100%. And even just the astronauts and the cosmonauts involved, like, think about what probably went through their heads during this process of, like, going from, oh my God, I'm going to have to work with them, to getting to know them and then sharing meals in space. Like, that's a crazy transformation of timelines. And I would love to, I do think that spaceflight has the ability to bond us and unite us, because it is ultimately, this little tiny little planet we're floating around on. It is the boundary that we all share. It only takes you getting off this planet to realize, oh my God, we're all neighbors. We're all living in the same house together. And I do think ultimately, as we continue to expand our horizons and expand our exploration, that it has the potential to unite us more than it has the potential to divide us.
So one of the potential conflicts of the 21st century that I think everyone wants to avoid, both in the cyberspace and in the hot war space, Cold War, hot war, all kinds of war, all kinds of economic conflict, is between the United States and China. So China is going full steam ahead in developing a space program, doing a lot of incredible work. Like you mentioned, 64 launches in 2022 with 2 failures. But, moving straight ahead.
And by the way, those failures, we had a lot of startups. Like, a lot of the launches were from brand new companies. So to have 2 failures out of 64, I mean, that's still impressive. If you look at operational launches, it was flawless.
Do you see a pathway where there's, again, in that same way, collaboration or friendly competition between all the different companies and nations in the United States and China in the next, as we push towards the moon, Mars, and beyond?
I held a dumb hope that China would actually be allowed to sign on to the Artemis Accord to be able to take part in this next step towards the moon. I mean, just imagine if they provided a propulsion module or a lander or something, and we actually came together to land on the moon instead of having another space race. It's like, it would have been so cool. And yeah, I still am hopeful that, similar to back in the Cold War, that we might have something like that someday, where we actually are collaborating. And it feels like sometimes we're really close to that, and then other times it feels like we're really far from that. And it just sucks because I know, and I try really hard on my channel to always separate and celebrate the work being done. Because at the end of the day, there's someone that's just going home to their family, clocking in hours, working really hard on pushing their program and doing engineering work. And it's we don't get to choose where we're born and what we're born into. So I really like to avoid the political aspects of things and the geopolitical aspects, and just appreciate the science and the science we're seeing, and the progress that China's doing in the last 10 years is very akin to the early spaceflight programs, and with the runway of like just keep on going. Like I see no reason for them to be slowing down. So it's definitely something to watch and be interested in. And who knows? I mean, there really genuinely might be a race to the moon again, and there really genuinely might be a race to Mars.
The part of me is excited about that because a race is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But the hopefully it's friendly competition and some collaboration. It is true that maybe I'm being a bit cynical, but nations sometimes, governments and leaders of those governments sometimes ruin things. Like you don't often have, like statistically speaking, it's harder to have a leader of a nation that looks beyond the particular political bickering of that nation, and you have like a JFK type character that really steps up and inspires. I think statistically speaking, it's better to have somebody like Elon, who's a leader of a company, like a commercial effort that is able to look beyond the borders of nations, and certainly inspiring educators like yourself to look beyond the borders of those nations and the geopolitical conflicts and so on, to inspire people. I think that's just made so much easier. Like you can have more reach. Tim Dodd can have more reach than NASA, right? Like in terms of inspiring the world, and that's fascinating. Like that gives power to the individuals that see past the silly short-term geopolitical conflicts.
Yeah.
That's the hope, at least.